Welcome to How Brands Are Built, where branding professionals get into the details of what they do and how they do it. I'm your host, Rob Meyerson. Thanks for listening. Today's episode is brought to you by SquadHelp, the world's #1 naming platform. Today's guest is Caren Williams. Caren and I met in 2012 at Interbrand San Francisco, where she was a director of strategy. She's since become an independent brand consultant, doing work for brands like Google, and she and I have been able to continue collaborating. One reason I wanted to talk to Caren is because her diversity of experience, which she'll walk through during the interview, gives her a unique perspective on brand strategy. Caren shares her thoughts, as well as some simple, straightforward tools and exercises you can use with clients to tease out the best ideas for building a brand experience. Without further ado, here's Caren Williams on How Brands Are Built. Caren Williams, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. I want to start with a question about your career path, which is not normally what we talk about on this show, but yours is pretty interesting. And I think some people will be interested to hear how you started out in the sort of CPG, consumer packaged goods world, and made your way over to brand consulting, where I met you at Interbrand. So could you just talk a little bit about that background?
Sure. I think it makes sense maybe to start with how I got into CPG in the first place. I went to grad school. I got my MBA specifically to go into brand and marketing. I don't think I knew what CPG was at the time, but I had kind of this vision of working for, a big company that sold products at a grocery store or something like that. But it had always been something I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And when I was there, I was taking a brand management class, and I don't remember what the lecture was specifically about, but I do recall our professor talking about brand consultancies. And he mentioned Landor and Interbrand. And that was when I first heard about best global brands. And he was like, they produce this ranking of the best brands in the world. And I just got so excited. I was like, this is what I want to do. So after class, I went up to him and I said, I know I've been really focused on working for a big product company, but I think I want to do consulting. And, he was probably like, slow down, eager student, and he said, I love that you are interested in this. And he said, my advice though is to actually work on a brand, and manage a brand, and then you'll be an even better consultant. So I kind of always had this just appreciation and love for, those type of strategists or designers, those specialists. But I did get very lucky. When I graduated, I got kind of the pinnacle, job, my dream job. And I went to Proctor & Gamble. I moved to Ohio for the job, which says a lot because I was not a Midwesterner. Right. You're from Texas originally, right? I'm from Texas, yes. And right. I went to grad school in Texas, so this was like a big departure.
Big move.
Worked on, they're probably bigger than this now, but we called them billion-dollar brands. Folgers Coffee, Tide Detergent, kind of the big flagship brands. Loved it. I was an assistant brand manager, learned a lot, moved out west, did the same kind of work at Nestle. I worked on the ice cream business and did Dryers and Edie's ice cream and a lot of the packaged snacks like popsicles and things. And then it was kind of at that point, so this had been maybe like 5 years of being in brand management, and we worked a lot with agencies. And I was like, I feel like I'm ready. Like I'm ready now. I had always been thinking about making this move. I'm ready now to be a brand consultant. But a kind of interesting opportunity came my way. A friend of mine worked at an innovation agency. It's called Jump Associates. And they were doing really cool work with really cool clients. And they were hiring people that they called kind of this intersection of creative and analytical minds. And I was like, oh my God, that's totally me. I manage P&L, but I love, kind of the creative strategic side of things.
Right.
So I went there, worked on fantastic clients, did really, really interesting things. We worked on just big problems for clients. It was not after a year that Interbrand contacted me, and I was like, it happened. Like I willed this to happen, way back in grad school. And so it was just something that.
And do you think now, knowing all that you know, was that professor's advice the right advice?
It's interesting because I don't think it's the only advice. Like it was amazing advice and it was right for me, but I don't think that everyone needs to follow that advice.
So talk a little bit about just the difference in the job. I guess there's some obvious things you've already mentioned about managing a P&L versus being a consultant where you typically don't have to worry about that, at least not directly. But I also know from our work at Interbrand, a lot of times we're doing brand strategy for companies at that corporate level. And sometimes it's B2B companies or B2B products. So what had to change, or what did you have to do differently going from packaged goods, popsicles, to doing the same type of work, strategy work still, brand strategy work, but for, say, a corporate brand?
Yeah. So a couple kind of nuances in there. I think the first one is I'm doing this with my hands, but you can't see me. But like on a spectrum where, if this is a brand, on one end you have running the business, sort of the general management side of things. On the other end, you have the brand building. As a brand manager, like my time at P&G and Nestle, you're squarely in the middle. So you're kind of overseeing all of it. And so you get to go, you're sort of on the surface, if I will say, of a lot of things, finance, operations, strategy, marketing, working with agencies, et cetera. And then when, I moved over to be a full-time brand strategist, you go really deep on that, end of the spectrum that's brand building. So there's that, for one, is you are going deep on a craft and a skill across many different things versus, sort of owning in the big picture of a lot of different things, but for one product or one brand. Right. So that's one nuance. You asked about kind of CPG versus corporate brands.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it's funny because when I was interviewing at Interbrand, everyone throughout the process kept saying, but can you do corporate brands? And I was like, what are they talking about? Aren't they all the same? But they are different, because a corporate brand is, you could think of it as a master brand or an umbrella brand. And so it holds a lot of different products and services in it. So fundamentally, the work is the same, I would say, and we can get into those components. But I think it's, how deep do you go on, usage and benefits and customer insights for a product brand versus a corporate brand? And they're different, I think, in that respect. But fundamentally, the brand building and the structure is the same.
And so what are some of those differences, whether they're nuances? And I'm especially curious about differences in process or tools that you might use for one that you don't use for the other and things like that.
Yeah. So maybe process is a good place to start. I feel like in a lot of the corporate brands, because they sit above all the different products and services, sometimes it's really hard and unnecessary to do a lot of deep consumer research for every single product within the portfolio, right? So, think about, we'll just take P&G. If you were building that, master brand, that umbrella brand, I don't know that it's necessary that you have deep consumer insights about how people use dish detergent versus, razors and things like that. It's more sort of the spirit and the ethos of the entire company. Mm-hmm. And so process-wise, I feel like, at least this is in my experience with corporate brands, it focuses a little bit more heavily on the company itself and what sort of stakeholders, and those could be, people running the company, board members, partners, et cetera, sort of more of their vision and mission and that kind of stuff. I feel like it's heavier on corporate brands, whereas on a product brand, you will go much deeper on, benefits and, to steal a P&G word, reasons to believe, or RTBs, really getting into the nuts and bolts of that thing.
And less, therefore, nobody has a mission statement for an individual flavor of of some product, right? So
exactly. So, think about, okay, so I don't remember, which is good because I won't give anything proprietary away because I actually don't remember it. But if you think about a P&G, we had a brand pyramid, and for Folgers coffee, that brand pyramid was for everything within the Folgers brand. So instant coffee, different flavors, different roasts, different forms, different size packages. You wouldn't necessarily have a brand pyramid for a 28-ounce dark roast whole bean coffee. That would be overboard. But you have it for the brand itself. But within there, you really do have those functional and emotional benefits and reasons to believe, at the product level.
You've mentioned a couple of really tactical things, and that's the kind of nerdy stuff I want to get into on the show. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned brand pyramids, and you mentioned reasons to believe, which presumably sit somewhere in that brand pyramid. Mm-hmm. So is that what Proctor, just as far as you know, because you haven't been there for a while, but I assume Procter & Gamble has a pretty formulaic approach they take because they have so many different products and brands. Is that what they're doing consistently? And can you say anything more about what's in that pyramid or how it's structured?
Yeah. Again, I can go from memory, which hopefully I'll get most of it right.
Don't divulge any corporate secrets.
I think that's not a problem. I probably don't remember the details. So yes, there is a brand pyramid that P&G uses, or at least when I was there, used for all of the brands within their portfolio. And I think what was really nice about that is, and this is just a side note, but part of the job of being a brand manager or assistant brand manager within Procter & Gamble is you do rotate a lot. So it's part of career development. You might be on a brand for 1.5 years to 2 years, and then you move to another one. So having that consistent framework just made it not easy, but made it somewhat, structured to move from brand to brand and be able to pick it up. I'm working on folders one day and then I'm working on Tide the next, and the nuts and bolts are the same, even though the products and the insights might be different. Right. But in a nutshell, from what I remember, kind of, at the base of it, again, I don't know that there's a vision necessarily, but, there's something sort of higher order, in the value space of the brand, because that's important, so that kind of sits at the base. And then, then there, was something to do with sort of customer insights, some of those core beliefs by your audience. Again, anyone that's at P&G now or remembers is probably like, no, that's not right at all. But, it does ladder up. And then I do recall, and this is something that, across brands are used, is the benefits. And that's sort of that key section. So we may think about it in the corporate brand sense as positioning pillars, but these would be benefits. And there is an important breakout between functional benefits and emotional benefits. So functional benefits, might be the things that people could essentially copy, might be the price or the, things like that. And then emotional benefits are those higher order ones. So functional benefit might be, the best cleaning product on the market,
Okay.
And then the emotional benefit is makes me feel proud of my home, or something like that. And then the reasons to believe are really to back up. If you say you're the best product, well, we kill 99.9% of germs, or, those kind of things.
Perfect.
And then, it does ladder up to sort of, personality or expression, attributes. And then there is something, at the top. We're used to it at Interbrand as I think it was flipped at the bottom at Interbrand, but the brand idea, that sort of thing that encapsulates everything within the pyramid.
Right.
So I would say it's just a little bit more specific and grounded in like a product brand, because it's a product. You are really trying to build a brand around, how and why and when, someone uses something or interacts with something, whereas that corporate brand might be a little bit more higher order. That's where we get those positioning pillars of, that are more almost tagline-y in a way.
Right. So you used that brand pyramid at P&G, then you went to Nestle, and presumably they had their own.
I think we also had a brand pyramid. I think it was also, It may have had some different components, and that's where I might be mixing some things up, like, the
Understandable.
Emotional versus functional. But yeah, it was also a pyramid, and it was very similar. So
let's pivot a little bit and talk about what you do with that pyramid or whatever that framework is once you've pinned all the words down. So I want to talk about brand experience. And I guess I'll start with, do you have any kind of working definition of just what brand experience is or what it means to you?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, because it circles me back to my time, working on an actual brand. I don't actually know what the textbook definition of brand experience is, but I always say it's making it real and actually bringing it to life for your audience, connecting the dots across everything you do. And it has two benefits. The first one is, we could, as brand strategists, we can look at a pyramid or a platform or something, and we're like, yes, I totally get it, and I know what to do with it. I think a lot of people look at that and they're like, okay, that sounds nice, but what do I do? I've literally had people say, now what do I do? And so brand experience is sort of that next level. It's if this is what defines you as a company or as a brand, if this is your ethos, what is the experience that you want your audience to have? It's not different from that. It's just sort of flip-flopping, thinking about, who are we? Who am I? Now, what do I want people to experience? If I say, I'm a really, friendly person, that's me, that I wouldn't say to someone, I'm a friendly person. I would say, I'm going to always, greet people by their first name. I'm going to ask them how they're doing. So it's that next, it's like taking it from what does it mean to you to what does it mean
in the world,
to them, in the world, to your audience, and really connecting the dots. I will use the most overused example, but I think what people think about is like Apple products. When you go to the site versus go to the store versus go to the Genius Bar versus you have the product, it feels the same. There's kind of no broken parts of it, because they have taken their brand strategy and they have made it an experience for their customers and they're connecting all the dots.
Yeah. And everyone loves to give that example because it also sort of, they make it look easy. It makes sense from the outside looking in, but we know that it's not easy. So how do you do that? Once you have your brand pyramid, how do you work with a client, let's say, to translate that into something that does connect all those dots out in the real world?
Yeah, this is like the most fun part of a project. I always think so. Whenever a client doesn't want to do it, they're like, no, we're good at strategy. I was like, can we just keep going? Because I feel like it's really fun because it's when it becomes less about me or my team and my ideas and really getting them involved. So there's absolutely no way that I could work with a client and say, here's what your experience should be across all your touch points without knowing all of those touch points. So I'll try to think of like the easiest way to explain what I do. You recall from Interbrand, we worked with a framework where we said it was, how does the brand come to life across people, communications, products, and
places
or spaces. Yeah. I actually use something really similar, and it's not because I'm trying to steal someone's framework. It's just that makes sense. Those are sort of these big categories. Now, I tend to go deeper and break them out into a few more sections, but I always say, let's start with a strategy and let's start with, whether it's the brand idea or the whole platform, what does it, sort of mean? Now, let's make a list of all, as many as we can think of, our core kind of customer interaction points, or as you would call them, touch points. Let's make a list of all of those. Where do we want, someone to experience the brand? Where do we want the brand to show up? So we literally just make a list of those. Sometimes it's a worksheet. Sometimes it's on a whiteboard, for a video. We're using some sort of Google Sheets or something. And then we literally go one by one and say, how would I modify this now that I, know this is my brand strategy and this is what I want to express? How would I modify this? Or what would I remove or what would I add? So we literally would go through every single one of those. And it sounds tedious, but it's not, because it's beneficial for two reasons. One being that you get people to just think about, you just be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this is something I needed to think about, the way a customer service representative answers the phone, for example. So that's beneficial. It's also beneficial for people that aren't purely abstract thinkers. Again, you can give me something kind of deep and abstract and I'll get it and I'll apply it to everything, but a lot of people aren't like that. They're more concrete thinkers. So it's like, let's take each one of the things and how does it show up when the brand is applied to it.
This episode of How Brands Are Built is brought to you by Squad Help, the world's #1 naming platform. Here's how Squad Help works. You launch a naming contest to engage hundreds of naming experts. You're guided through an agency-level naming process that goes beyond traditional crowdsourcing. The platform uses AI and includes name validation features such as audience testing, trademark validation, linguistic analysis, and quality scoring. And Squad Help doesn't just do naming. You can also use their platform for taglines or slogans, as well as logo design. To launch your naming contest today, go to squadhelp.com and start receiving custom name suggestions instantly. Squad Help, company, brand, and business name ideas by experts. Today's episode is also brought to you by Audible. For listeners of How Brands Are Built, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. Listener John Schleining suggested that if you're looking for something to read, go to our useful list on the blog, which includes book recommendations from many of our guests, including Caren Williams. Thanks, John, for that recommendation. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/HBAB for How Brands Are Built. Again, that's audibletrial.com/HBAB to get your free audiobook. Now back to the conversation with Caren. And so I want to just touch again on these distinctions we've been drawing between the world of CPG and, say, corporate branding. I assume you could apply that same methodology, but the lists would look very, very different, right? So if it's a packaged good, then you're talking maybe about the packaging or the experience in the grocery store and then the product itself. Whereas for a corporate brand, you have things like onboarding for employees and social responsibility initiatives of the company and things like that. Is that really the only, so the same process maybe, but very different output?
Yeah, exactly. I say this, but I don't know that this is true. It almost feels more natural on a product brand or, in a CPG environment to think about all those things because that's what you're doing. On a daily basis, you are thinking about where it's going to be on shelf, what the packaging is going to look like, what the coupon says. That's part of your kind of daily routine and how you think about the brand. Whereas, at the corporate level, we tend to not think about all those touch points. I love that you mentioned onboarding because I always say, let's not forget about people. People's one that people forget about, like even performance reviews. It's in your performance reviews, are you actually, quote unquote, living the brand? People don't think about, wow, the brand extends all the way there. So maybe it's just a little, either it's wider or it's less natural. But yeah, I think it takes a little bit more rigor and thought at the corporate level.
And last question on this, do you have any tips or strategies that you use if you're in a brainstorm session with a client and you're going through and you've successfully listed out all these touch points, but now you're going through trying to say, well, how would we change it? What would we add? What would we take away? To sort of really push the client to think creatively or to try things on that maybe they wouldn't have considered before. I just wonder if you sometimes get into a situation where you feel like you and or the client is having trouble figuring out, well, we have this strategy, we think it's right, we like everything about it, but we're not really coming up with what feel like really dramatic or interesting or different ideas across these touch points.
Yeah. Yes. I love work sessions. So I always come with whether they're virtual or in person, I always come with lots of prompts and lots of ideas because that can happen. Whether it's just fatigue of working on a brand, you're like, I've been sitting here for 3 hours and I can't think about this anymore, or it's just not your natural way of thinking. Some things, just a couple examples that come to mind. Sometimes it's hard. This is just true for life. You could apply this to anything in your life. It's hard to think about what you want something to be, but it's easy to think about what you don't want it to be. And so if people are kind of stuck, sometimes I'll say, all right, I'm just take an example, your landing page. How do we want to change this so that it, really represents the brand that we've just created? And let's say the ideas are kind of like, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking about normal things or nothing really inspirational coming up. You can say, okay, what would be the worst homepage, worst landing page that we could come up with that would really just not represent the brand? And for some reason, it's easier. It's like when you ask someone a question, they're like, well, I don't know what I want to do, but I know what I don't want to do, and so that's a nice way. And you take that and you say, now what's the opposite of that? So there's different ways, like just sort of creative brain games where you can get to the end result without just saying, what should this look like based on the brand? What should this look like based on the brand? Another way is just sort of not putting so much pressure on one person or one team to come up with something. So you may say, okay, you guys take people and you can brainstorm around this area. And then you take their ideas and you pass them to the next group or to another person and let them kind of build. Because another thing also it's easier for us to do is build on other people's work. Sometimes they come up with something from scratch. So there's a lot of just kind of, brain games, if you will, that, can get to a really great result. And I would say I've learned a lot of those just through the years, especially at Jump, the innovation agency. They had so many amazing ways to get people thinking. And so I definitely borrow some of those. That's great.
I love brain games. That sounds a lot more fun than conference call or even brainstorm session, unfortunately, has become sort of a dull corporate term.
I know.
I said that was the last question, but I want to make sure I do touch on something really quickly. I realize you and I are pretty familiar with places, people, communications, and product. But for our listeners who maybe haven't heard that framework before, can you talk a little bit about what's included in each of those four things? Maybe we can just rattle off some of the ideas that would be housed within each of those four.
Sure, yeah. We'll start with, typically this is the easiest one, and that's products. And I always like to say products and services. Those are just the things that you make and that you sell. And so let's just pick Google. We picked Apple, we'll pick Google now. So that would be, like the G Suite, your mail and your Drive and things like that. Those are products. So if you're trying to bring your brand to life, it's not just how do you bring it to life across your advertising and your communications and your messaging. It's actually the things that you make and sell need to represent that brand. Communications is another, I don't know, the easy one, but more natural one, because that is your written or verbal communication. So that is where most of your marketing and advertising, falls into.
Right.
You do email marketing or social or anything like that. But it's also, if you're going to have, people, whether it's answering emails or a chat or a phone, for customer service, what do you want them to say? What's sort of that script? So that's also communication.
Sure. And that could be a keynote speech from the CEO. It could be your content strategy. So what's on your blog. So there are all kinds of, I think maybe a good way to think of that is, anything that's written or spoken, basically, on behalf of the company or the brand.
Exactly. So people could be your own, employees, people that maybe never interact with customers. You could think about, is it your finance department? Is it your, whoever, and you think in your corporate office. It could also be people who are out there working on, behalf of your brand that are customer facing. So if you have retail store employees, or if you're Lyft or Uber, your drivers, it's really anyone in a, people capacity that can bring your brand to life. And that's what we were talking about earlier. It could be conversational, and it could be in that way. It also could be, if you're talking about your internal employees, how are you measuring them? What's in their performance reviews that you want them to live up to? What does your job description say even? You could think about that as people.
Right.
And then places and spaces, this is why I like to break this one out, because it tends to get confusing just because so much of our world is digital. But this is physical places. So if you have a store, your corporate office even, what does your lobby look like? What are the names of your conference rooms? Airbnb, I think, is a perfect example of this. Their conference rooms are modeled after some of their actual places that the guests can stay in. So I think they picked some of, I don't know if they're their favorite ones or most popular ones, but their conference rooms actually represent some of the people's homes, which I think is really cool. Places and spaces also includes digital places and spaces. So the easiest way to differentiate, is a website communications or is that a space? I like to say if it's a place that people can go, like they can show up there, then it's a place or a space. So your website, someone can just go there. I think of that as a space. They're entering into your brand world. If it's something that, they might see or hear on a regular and frequent basis, then it's more communication.
Got it. Okay, great. Let's do some sort of lightning round wrap-up questions here. I have a few things I want to ask. So, book recommendations. Something, it doesn't have to be like a business or branding book necessarily, but something that you've read that you feel kind of influenced the way you think about what you do.
Yeah, well, okay. I got to go really old school on this.
Yeah.
So there's a book called Why We Buy, Paco Underhill, I believe is the name. And I think a lot of people know this book, but either it was like a pioneer in sort of customer or consumer insights, or I was just young enough and it was the first one I read. But it literally does talk about sort of why, behaviors around purchasing and why we reach for things on the middle shelf versus the lower shelf. It was fundamental to me. And I read it before I went to grad school while I was still, I don't tell many people this, but I guess I'm now telling a lot of people this, while I was still a computer programmer and doing technology consulting. I read that book. I was like, this is what I want to do. So it's basic, it's simple, it's old. So I think it's sort of like, it just very straightforwardly communicates. It's not trying to be fancy. I think it's an amazing one.
Great. I got to admit, I don't know that. Well, the title sounds really familiar, but I don't think I know it. So I'm looking forward to picking that up.
Yeah. Another one that when I was at Jump, we had a little library there, and they're the coolest books were in the library. And I picked up a book called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, which you can kind of tell, I really enjoy the things that are about the insights that drive the behavior, that then you build a brand around. And it's about exactly what the title says, how, as human beings, we make pretty irrational, decisions, but they're completely predictable. And I think it's just so fascinating.
Yeah.
It has to do with pricing and, just, it's not about necessarily behavior with purchases, but you can apply it to that as a brand builder.
Yeah, his books are a lot of fun, and he's got a couple other ones. I don't know what the most recent one is, but he's still writing, and that's a whole sort of school of, I guess, behavioral economics, right? So there's Thinking Fast and Slow also, which is written by Daniel Kahneman, but sort of similar ideas. Great. So last question, we started with kind of a career-oriented question, so we'll end with any advice that you have for junior people or people that are just interested in getting into branding or brand strategy.
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I mean, a couple things. I feel everyone wants to work on something that they are personally passionate about, whether that's fashion or pets or technology. What I've found is if you love the art and the craft of brand building, it doesn't matter what you work on. Like, there's some excitement and some thrill in working on anything, and so I feel like I often do say to people, it's fine. If you're really passionate about a specific, category, great, go for it. But, if you're really trying to kind of break into the world of brand, like, work on things that don't necessarily sound sexy. I don't remember if this was when you and I were together, but, my first couple of projects at Interbrand scared the crap out of me. I worked on aerospace and I worked with Intel, and I was like,
it's not ice cream anymore.
Ice cream. Yeah. And so it was really, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be good at this. But it taught me that, no matter what it is, B2B, B2C, someone has something they want people to engage with. And then there's an audience out there that needs to engage with it. And, I love that kind of craft of connecting those dots through a brand. So I would say don't get so hung up on what it is, the category. I know we mentioned this right at the beginning, even though I don't think this is the only way forward, I actually really do recommend working on a brand, on a product, kind of really understanding what it's all about. And then you're a better consultant, in some ways, because you've been there, you've lived it. So I think kind of, if you have the opportunity, kind of, getting your wings by actually going deep on something is a great place to start.
Great. Well, Caren, thank you so much for all of your insights and ideas. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, Rob. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to How Brands Are Built. If you liked the episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's an easy way to support the show, and it helps others find out about it. To learn more about Caren, you can check out her new website at caren-williams.com. That's Caren with a C, Caren-williams.com. I'll put a link on the episode right up, along with a full transcript of our conversation. On another note, for those of you still listening, if you listened to last week's episode with Fabian Gerhalter, and you know someone who could benefit from his one-day brand strategy intensive, Fabian's created an online version, and he was kind enough to provide a unique promo code for How Brands Are Built listeners. So if you're interested, find the link on the write-up for his episode and use the promo code HBAB for How Brands Are Built. How Brands Are Built is a production of Heirloom Agency, LLC. Our theme music is by Isha Erskine Project. I'm Rob Meyerson, and I'll talk to you next time.